Yes, we do. He's a gentleman who spent more than a decade in public service. He's been representing the 2nd District on the LA City Council since 2010. He was born and raised right here in the San Fernando Valley and holds the distinction as being the very first Armenian American to be elected to public office in the city of Los Angeles. Just one of his accomplishments includes his leadership on LA's Budget and Finance Committee, which helped to guide this city through the Great Recession. And he has been a part of Forest Lawn's Memorial Day service. He actually was here just not too long ago for the Memorial Day services, and we're very pleased to have him back here for the Veterans Day services. Please help me welcome Councilmember Paul Krekorian. Paul Krekorian.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So let me first say just how grateful I am to everyone who's here, braving the sun, for being out here and taking time out of this beautiful day for this important commemoration. My dad, who rests just a few hundred yards from here, was a Marine Corps veteran of World War II. And as his son, I can tell you how much I appreciate seeing all of you here to recognize our veterans. For too many Americans, seems like Veterans Day has become an opportunity to hit the department stores and beat Black Friday, or on a day like this, maybe take a trip to the beach. But by being here today, instead of doing those things, each of you each of you is declaring that, above all else, Veterans Day is about recognizing the service and the loyalty and the sacrifice and the commitment of those extraordinary men and women among us who've worn the uniform of the United States Armed Services. And fortunately, throughout these United States, in bustling cities and in quiet towns, there are still Americans who are gathering this morning, just as we are here, to remember and to honor the men and women who've served our country so that all of us and others throughout the world might live in freedom and in safety. In Washington and in many state capitals and in town squares throughout our country, there are majestic monuments to great military and political leaders, presidents and others who've in some way have bent the arc of history. But Veterans Day reminds us that all of those grand achievements by the famous are made possible by those whose name history does not mark. The grocers and the mail carriers and the teachers and the mechanics and the students who were asked by their country to rise to the occasion, and they did. They were ordinary Americans who could have stayed home and lived a comfortable life surrounded by their families and their friends. But instead, they answered our country's call and stepped up to serve a greater cause. And in doing so, all sacrificed some, and some sacrificed all. If you've ever visited the D-Day landing beaches at Normandy, you can understand why books and movies have been made about the great vastness of that invasion. You gaze out at this endless sea and you can imagine it covered with landing craft and ships of every kind, the largest amphibious assault in the history of the world. You look at these long beaches stretching out in either direction, and you can envision them blackened with massive waves of troops, 150,000 in all, desperately scrambling forward. But when we think in scales like that, big scales like that, we can lose sight of the fact that even a world-changing event of that magnitude really comes down to individual decisions by individual people, making the individual choice to overcome their own terror and do the unnatural thing of putting their own lives in grave danger in service to our country. One person charging out of the landing craft in face of enemy fire. One person scrambling for cover on the beach. One person inspiring others and leading the way up the cliffs. One person after another person, after another person, after another person. So when you see the U.S. cemetery there or anywhere else, with row after row after row of white headstones in perfect lines that seem to extend to the horizon, you realize that each one of those markers is a monument at least as important to the history of our country as the grandest statue of a general or of a president. Because everyone who lies under those markers, and everyone who returns with injuries, and everyone who donned the uniform in peacetime as well, have gained their place in the long and strong chain of sacrifice that connects one generation of ordinary American heroes to the next. It's a chain that began when the farmers of Concord put aside their pitchforks and picked up their muskets and forced the king's troops to retreat at the North Bridge. It's a chain that extended through Gettysburg, through Okinawa and Incheon and Quezon. And it's a chain that continues to this day in the chaos and violence of Iraq and Afghanistan and the danger that our forces are subjected to everywhere in this world. And each of you veterans who are here with us today, and every other American who has formed a link in that chain across all the wars and across all the generations, you have played an essential part in building the nation we love. Over the course of our history, the world certainly has changed, and the threats to our country have changed, and the missions of our armed forces have changed. But the valor, the dignity, and the courage of the men and women in uniform remain the same, and so does the strength of their families who sacrifice along with them. Each of them, in each generation, has left a legacy of freedom, and they taught their children and their children's children the value of sacrifice and devotion and service, and most of all, love of country. All of those who have served, both the living and the dead, have become our teachers. Through their service, they remind us of the extraordinary potential of ordinary Americans. They remind us of the principles for which our country stands, and they remind us of the courage and commitment necessary to maintain those principles. They remind us of both the blessings we enjoy and the cost we must bear as citizens of the last best hope of Earth. And we owe them a debt which we can never fully repay, but which we must always strive to repay. And that's a debt that includes our obligation to ensure that they have adequate health care, that we take care of our homeless veterans, that we provide jobs and educational opportunities to those returned, that we support them in overcoming their emotional scars, and that we fight against veteran suicide. Most of all, we owe them the debt of respect. And we owe them the debt of dedicating ourselves to the never-finished work of building a nation worthy of their sacrifice. At a time like today, when our nation seems more divided than it ever has been, we have to remind ourselves that a casket draped in our flag, or a man or woman in uniform saluting it, should be images that remove all divisions among us. The person who wears our country's uniform is not defined by political party, nor race, nor religion, nor gender, nor economic status. That person is an American patriot. And if that patriot shall not have sacrificed in vain, then each of us must find it in ourselves to set aside our own differences and resolve truly to be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May God bless all who have served, bless the souls of our departed, give strength to those who've been wounded, bless their families, and always bless the country for which they served. Thank you all very, very much.